Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamane. This is my last of 3 videos on the Cody Firearms Museum. Today I want to talk about the museum as an education about firearms, not a celebration of firearms. So in my first 2 videos on the Cody Firearms Museum, I talked about the big picture of the museum and how it tried to be welcoming to newbies, to novices, to gun-curious people, to gun skeptics, or people who have no real knowledge or experience of firearms, but that among the over 4,000 artifacts displayed in the museum, there's plenty here for gun nuts as well. But of course, museums are not supposed to be a celebration of firearms or a defense of the Second Amendment. A firearms museum ought to be historically accurate and educational. And I think that the redevelopment of this museum by Ashley Lubinsky and Danny Michael and their team really starts to incorporate some of those broader educational missions. I think they could do more. I think Ashley and Danny wish they could do more, but museum curation is a complex economic and political and organizational process. But let me show you in today's video some of the things that I think are really interesting that they've added to the museum. So again, this is the main entrance, and not far from this educational exhibit here, you have a historical timeline that you could take if you go this way. But if you go to the left instead, past the bizarre firearms section, which they have a lot of really cool things, you come across the Gun Chronicles, this mural, which is a picture that ran in Time magazine, which brings together over 200 people from all aspects of the gun debate in American society. In the original Time magazine web story, if you go to that website, which is still active, called the Gun Chronicles, you can click on each of the individuals in this picture and they will talk a little bit about how they view guns. And I haven't seen this image this large, and when you look at it this large, you start to recognize some faces that you might not have noticed if you're just looking at it on paper or on a computer or on a phone. So, front and center here, you find Kevin Dixie. Not too far away from him, you see Gabby Giffords there. If you go up a little bit higher, you can see Gabby Franco and lots of other people that I either know or know of, Maj Touré, and there's the journalist Stephen Katowski of The Reload, and on and on. So you see all of the diverse faces of American guns and the debate over guns, all the way from Black Lives Matter activists who are not in favor of guns, to people who are sporting Black Lives Matter shirts, as well as holding firearms, and everyone in between. So this is a really great point in the museum to stop and ponder the broader debate over guns in America. And it doesn't take a side, right? It just shows what the nature of that debate is. I don't know if you can hear in the background, but occasionally on some of these videos you may hear some French language being spoken, again highlighting the fact that you get all sorts of visitors to this museum who are just passing through. So this is a family, I don't know whether they're French Canadian or from another French speaking country, but it's a father, mother, and 3 kids. In any event, this is another section where we see an attempt to put firearms sort of in a broader historical, social, and cultural context, a timeline that's thematically organized around war, sport, legislation about firearms, consideration of the misuse of firearms, which is oftentimes related to legislation attempting to counteract that misuse, and of course, defensive use of firearms. So defending or resisting an attack is a natural instinct. Firearms have played a prominent role throughout history for many individuals wanting wanting protection, right? And noting that ownership of firearms for defense is a common part of American history. Here was a conversation corner that sort of had to be set aside because of COVID, but they posed a question about 3D printing, and they asked people to comment, and people did comment, and they displayed comments that sort of run the gamut from sort of pro to anti, and again, that is, I think, an important aspect of a museum, some interactive work, some thinking involved as people go through the museum. And again, putting firearms in their cultural context, we have to really recognize the importance of popular culture in developing, again, the myth and reality of firearms, especially the myth and reality of the Wild West. Of course, this is the Buffalo Bill Center, and so his Wild West shows were hugely important for that, as well as television shows and movies. And the idea, for example, that the Winchester rifle was the gun that won the West is something really significant to reflect on, and the museum does do that. The original collection of this museum came from the Winchester Corporation, and so it's not surprising that there's a lot of representation of that, including this sign that was outside of the factory. But again, the gun that won the West, this Winchester lever action rifle, of course, came into broad use after the West significantly was already won. So, that, as the display highlights, is a myth, but it is also significant to think about ways in which the Winchester rifle was not just an important tool for those who were settling the West from the East, but also firearms that were commonly in the hands of the indigenous populations that already lived there. And so here's an example of a Winchester model 1873 rifle. The lighting is not great here, but you can see that it's been, as the museum says, culturally modified by the indigenous person who owned this rifle. Really interesting and thought-provoking. So here again, coming into the military section, you see a lot of both special guns and historically common guns, and very popular among the kid and visitors especially, and also some adults who are kids at heart. The Ma-Deuce, the M2 machine gun, and got to fire off a couple of rounds of that. But culturally and historically, I think what's really fascinating about this section is this exhibit here on the cost of war. Few human endeavors are as costly as armed conflict. And this is something that is important to take into consideration if we want to look at the full picture of firearms. And what I thought was particularly moving for myself was this large image in the display of the Hart Mountain internment camp for Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. It's just a dozen miles north of Cody. I visited there also, and if you come to Cody, I highly recommend you take some time to go up there. It is an evolving interpretive center. Even in its current state, it's worth taking some time to ponder. It's really hard to summarize everything that I've seen in my tour yesterday and my revisiting the museum today. But I think what the museum really highlights is the true reality of firearms in human history, the reality of firearms in American history in all of their diversity, types, uses, good, bad. And that's what a museum should really do. A museum is educational. And if you want to learn about firearms, you should come here and learn about firearms. If you already know a lot about firearms, come here anyway. I'm sure there's something that you can learn from the massive collection of artifacts here, as well as the interpretive materials. Congratulations to Ashley Lubinsky and Danny Michael for the work that they did getting this museum into the shape that it is today. It's truly, as I said before, an 11 out of 10 must-do experience.